2. Okay.
Okay, good.
Is it recording?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm going to let everyone in. Okay, Shiri, we're going to start now.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes till a few more people join, and then we will begin. Okay, we'll wait one more minute, and then people can join as they enter. Okay, Anat, should we begin? Shiri, should we begin? Yes, okay, I've got the go ahead. So good evening, everyone. I'm Cara Case. I'm the Chief Executive of the Tao Trust in the UK, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to tonight's Baking Babka with the Best, bit of a tongue twister, foodinar, a first for Tao. We're especially excited to have here with us many of our Tao alumni, not only in the UK, but also in Israel. So welcome to you all. Tonight, we have the special privilege of working with the Tao alumnus herself, Shiri Kraus, a London-based pastry chef who we were lucky enough to meet nearly 2 years ago, and for obvious reasons, we won't let her go from our grasp. Shiri didn't start out as a chef. She studied nursing at Tao, and when she moved to London, where qualifications and other things lay in her path, she turned her attention to baking, and we're very glad she did. She has worked with some of London's finest restaurants, Palomar and the Babary, which some of you know, to name a few, stepping back recently to return to her cooking roots at home. She now bakes bespoke cakes and cupcakes to order using fresh local ingredients. As she likes to say, each dish tells a story, and we're excited to hear hers tonight. I briefly Googled Babka, and Wikipedia came up with several pages, literally many pages of information on this Jewish baking tradition. So I'm going to leave it to Shiri to tell you about that in a minute, but before I do, there's just a few little housekeeping rules. Please feel free to leave your cameras on. Your sound will be muted, but if you're asking a question, Anat, who you will see maybe on your screen, will in a little bit, will unmute you. And if you have a question, you could put it in the chat or raise your hand and Anat will come to you. So I think without further ado, we'll go over to you, Shiri, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and welcome to my humble kitchen. Today, as Cara said, we're going to be baking some babka. A little bit about the background of babka. So it originates from Eastern Europe, as most of you will probably guess. And the source of the name comes from grandma or baba. And I think it's the type of food that really creates a kind of a comfort, and it's the type of food that you will have with your with your afternoon tea or when you go to visit your grandma. And how did it begin? So they had leftover challah dough, and they used to roll it up with dried fruits or some cinnamon and then bake it, and they saw that it was very nice. Over the years, it evolved slowly, and then with time, it turned into almost like a brioche dough, so a butter enriched dough. The dough that we'll be making today is also enriched with butter, and it is milky dough. If you want it to be pareve or abstain from dairy, you can substitute all of the dairy components of the dish to non-dairy components, such as soy milk or oat milk, and the butter for coconut oil. And if you want to be making this completely vegan, that's not a problem. Just use an egg substitute. However, I would not omit that. Even though I don't really like working with egg substitutes, In this recipe, I think it's a bit of a necessity. For those of you who want to make it slightly bit healthier, you can go down the spelt flour route. So the spelt flour is gluten-free, and it is much healthier for you because it breaks up in your body a lot slower. So if you do that with a healthier version of the spread, you can definitely call this a health food or something. Filling wise, so up until the year of around 2010, Babka was only prevalent in New York and Israel. And around 2010, when Israeli chef Uri Chef opened up his bakery in New York, Lechamim, or Bread's Bakery, it became very popular and very Instagrammable, obviously, over the years. And now it is like literally everywhere. There's like a boom for it. Now, the ways to make a babka, the basic form of the dough is what we call a krantz dough, or you roll it into a log and then you cut it through the middle. We're going to do this a bit later. And then you braid it. You can also braid it in a circular shape. You can make little small babkins or babka muffins, bake them in a muffin tin, and make all sorts of shapes with that. A little bit about working with yeast. A lot of people are a bit worried about working with yeast because, you know, all the grandma tales about putting a yeast under a duvet and making them rise. Don't be afraid. It's not that hard, and it's pretty much straightforward. All you need to do is follow a couple of really basic rules, and then you've got it sorted. The flour that you're going to use, or I'm going to use today, you can use plain flour or you can use strong flour. The difference between them is with the percentage of gluten within the flour. What is gluten? Gluten is the protein that exists within the flour. And when you work the dough, the gluten develops into like a cobweb. And on top of that, all the little bubbles that the yeast form, they sit on that. So that makes your pastry fluffy and very nice and pleasant to eat. Yeast, obviously, I am using dried yeast today. These come, in the UK at least, they come in a packet. In Israel, they're very, you can find them in every supermarket in the fresh form. And they can come in a cube or in a powder shape in the fresh form. These are dried yeast. I bake with dried yeast mostly because I bake a lot and I need a lot of yeast. So I just buy the 500-gram pack and it keeps for like ages. You can keep it in the freezer. That's not a problem. If you've had a packet of yeast that's been in your fridge or in your house for a very, very long time, if you want to see if your yeast is active, because this is a form of fungus, if you want to see if it's active and it's going to work and make your dough nice, all you need to do is take your yeast and flood it with water and put a tiny bit of sugar into your water, and then see after about 5 to 10 minutes if it froths up, it means that the yeast are alive and they're ready to work. If it doesn't, it means that your yeast are sadly deceased, and then you need to get rid of that and get some fresh yeast for yourself. Hydration. So we are going to hydrate our dough, or add liquids to our dough today with milk and water. Why is that? So milk adds a little bit more of a texture and creaminess to the dough, but I don't want it to be, there's less water percentage in the milk. So I want it to be hydrated as well, and not just very creamy. It is one of the tips that I can give you about working with a yeast dough: don't be tempted to add flour. Even if your dough seems very, very sticky, it's okay. And a sticky dough or a wet dough will produce a much fluffier and softer dough compared to a dough that has a lower percentage of liquids. To finish it all up, we're going to add some fats to our dough. They add some richness and moistness to our dough. We have two forms of fat. One of them is obviously eggs, and the other one is butter, which, as I mentioned before, you can substitute this for coconut oil or any kind of like a vegan butter alternative if you want to make your babka parev, or if you want to make it, dairy-free or vegan even. On top of that, we're going to talk about the fillings. So today I'm going to make a chocolate filling. Now, chocolate filling was not even present until late in the 2010s. Before that, babkas were usually filled with dried fruits, cinnamon, and spices. So if you want to go down that route, that's absolutely fantastic and it tastes amazing. All you need to do is, instead of using chocolate like we're doing today, you need to smear your dough with some butter, sprinkle some sugar, and then on top of that you can add your cinnamon or your raisins if you want, and nuts. Over here I have some chocolate chips that you can use. I'm using 57% chocolate calais. You can definitely add some nuts. I have pistachios here, and even if you're making chocolate babka, feel free to scatter some pistachios or walnuts or anything of the like. You can make it with tahini, which is obviously one of my favorite things. You can mix the tahini with some date honey or honey or maple syrup or agave syrup for a very nice Middle Eastern inspired filling, and add spices to that as well. You can add nutmeg or cinnamon, and my son's favorite Biscoff spread, which you can also spread on the dough and then roll it. It's really nice and caramelly flavored. And like I said, obviously cinnamon. So today, to make our dough, the list of ingredients, as I'm sure you've all had it. So what we're gonna do today, I'm gonna make the dough with you right now, show you how to make the dough. After that, we're gonna see how to roll the dough, fill the dough, and then shape it, and then we're gonna bake it, obviously. So we were going to need 500 grams of flour. Like I said, I am using strong flour. You can use plain flour. If you use strong flour, your pastry will have a better structure. If you can get, I know now with quarantine and COVID, and in my Tesco right around the corner, it took them 4 months to have strong flour back in stock. So it's okay to use plain flour. It's not going to make a horrible babka, but it's better to use strong flour. So I'm using 500 grams of strong flour today. I am using 100 grams of sugar, and I'm going to be using some salt as well. Now, the importance of sugar and salt is twofold. They balance out the flavors, and they control the growth of the yeast. Meaning, if you don't add any salt into your dough, your yeast is just going to go a little bit crazy, and we don't want to do that, because a lot of people tend to think that if their dough doesn't prove a lot, that means that they're going to have a very bad babka. That's not true. A babka or bread, that's not true. Don't be tempted to add any more yeast to your dough, any more sugar to your dough. It's just going to make an overproof, and then your dough, instead of being really nice and risen, it's going to go shrink. So the sugar, other than helping giving the yeast some food, what it does, it helps with the caramelization and like the nice, really golden color of the babka. And it also helps to balance out all of the other flavors. Salt, like I said, controls the growth of the yeast, which, as we've mentioned, is a type of fungus. So it eats the yeast, and then it produces carbon dioxide, and that's the little bubbles that you get that give the babka or the bread its texture. So we're going to use both of them. Even if you're making a sweet babka like we're doing today, don't be tempted to omit the salt. Always use salt. Jumping back to the fillings for a second, you can also fill the babka with savory fillings. So you can do it with pesto, you can do it with sun-dried tomatoes, some goat's cheese, and you can I got a message in the chat right now that's shame that the ingredients say didn't use strong flour. You can use strong flour, you can use plain flour. It's okay to use either. You'll get a better result with the strong flour, but it doesn't mean that you won't get a very nice good result with plain flour. And then for the hydration, like I said, I'm gonna be using milk and water, 120 and 60 respectively. This dough, by the way, will yield 2 large babkas. On top of that, we have our fats, which is eggs and butter. The butter should be soft. What does it mean soft? It means that when you push it, it kind of like pushes down, okay? But it's not very, very soft and watery and melty. Now, when you mix the dough, you will probably see that the dough is very, very wet. Again, I'm reminding you, everyone, do not add any more flour. It's okay. Just continue kneading as you go. So we're going to start off in my stand mixer with the dough hook, which is this. If you don't have the dough hook, that's okay. You can use a paddle attachment. Don't use the whisk attachment because we don't want to incorporate a lot of air into our dough. We don't need that. We need to give the yeast an opportunity to do their own thing. So in a standing mixer with the dough hook, oh, sorry, I was asked just before the session, I think Cara asked me if you can do it by hand. Yes, you can, but it's going to take a long time, and you're going to need to work it very, very hard. However, I've only had a mixer for the past, I think, 10 to 12 years. Before that, I did all of my doughs by hand, and it was okay. It just means that you need to work slightly bit harder, but it's okay. So in our stand mixer, we're going to put in my bowl, I'm going to put all of my flour, which is again 500 grams. And then I'm going to add all of my yeast, which is 12 grams if you're using the dried yeast. And then I'm going to get a whisk or a fork, and I'm just going to mix them in together. Now, the reason being, I want the yeast to be incorporated throughout the flour. You don't need a whisk, obviously, for that. You can use your hand if you don't have a whisk or a fork. Just incorporate the yeast throughout the flour. Next up, we're going to use our sugar. Now, in many recipes, you will see to add the salt at the very, very end. It makes a lot of sense because salt affects the growth of yeast. However, if you mix it into the flour at this stage, I'm trying to basically make life easier for me and for everyone else. So if you incorporate this salt at this stage, it's not a problem so long as you whisk it into the flour. It's still going to give you a very nice babka. So I'm going to add half of a teaspoon of salt, just plain salt, like that. I don't know if you can see it. Just plain salt. So I'm going to add it in, and then I'm going to whisk it together. Next up, I'm going to add my liquids. So I'm going to add my milk, my water. Now, you should be separating your fats from your, do dry yeast yield a better result than regular yeast? I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to add my fat a little bit later because the things that inhibit the growth of yeast is salt and fat and lack of moisture. Okay, so I'm going to be putting this into my standing mixer with my hook attachment. And then I'm going to be mixing this for about 3 to 4, maybe 5 minutes until the dough starts clumping around. So I'm going to be operating that. If there's too much noise, please let me know. My mixer is a bit old. And then I'm going to answer about the question about the yeast. The main difference between dry yeast and fresh yeast is with their smell when you keep them and when you bake them. So dried yeast baked goods will smell less of yeast compared to fresh yeast baked goods. That's number one. Number two, fresh yeast are much harder to come by than dried yeast. And third thing, fresh yeast lasts a lot less than dried yeast because I keep my dried yeast in the freezer for a very, very long time, and it's absolutely fine. So I only found fresh yeast in this country, at least, with specialized my suppliers, basically for my professional kitchens, or in bakeries that are willing to give me some fresh yeast. But I couldn't regularly find them in like your normal shops. So dried yeast are much easier to come by. However, for the home baker, the end result comparing between dried yeast and fresh yeast, the difference is not huge. They even didn't say to add water, and I already mixed the dough with the fats. Should I add the water now? Absolutely yes. Yes, add the water now. That's not a problem at all. I'm going to stop my mixer for a second, and I'm going to show you what it looks like now. Right now, it looks a bit crumbly, as you can see. I'm going to mix this a little bit more. And then I'm going to add my fats. I'm going to add my fats when I see the dough starts to form together, okay? With regards to temperature, there's two types of proving for yeasty doughs. You can hot prove it or cold prove it. If you hot prove it, that means that you make your dough and you leave it outside or in a preheated oven that's been switched off about 40, 50 degrees, and then let it proof. And it will prove really quickly, and then you can immediately after that make your dough and bake your baked goods. The downside to that is that your dough is less delicate this way. If you cold proof, that means that I'm making my dough and then I'm letting it rest in the fridge overnight for at least for 2 hours, and that enables all the ingredients to be very, very cold, and the yeast are still alive and working, but they are proving very, very slowly, and that provides a much more delicate and soft dough. I'm going to stop my mixer again, and I'm going to show you. It's much more combined together. It's still a bit crumply, but it's much more of a dough. If I hold it in my hand, you see it forms a dough. I am now going to be adding my fats. I'm going to start with my eggs. So 2 eggs, 1 and 2. That's 1, and that's 2. And I'm going to let that mix. Now the speed in which I'm mixing is medium speed. Don't mix it on too high, even though you're tempted to, because you think that, you know, it's going to make a better dough. It's going to incorporate a lot of air into the dough. And yeast are, they thrive in an environment that has less air compared to others. We did the same thing at Karen left. I don't know what that is. The dough was already risen overnight and it's quite hard now. Should we add water? No. The dough is hard because I'm presuming, you have butter in the dough. And butter hardens when it goes in the fridge. So that's okay. Just leave your dough outside for 10 to 15 minutes, and then it will be much more pliable and much more forgiving and much easier to work with. But do not add any water to your dough, please. As you can see, my dough is really coming together and it's starting to separate from the sides. If you can see, it's really separating from the sides. And now is the time for me to add my butter. Now, like I said, I had 250 grams of butter, which is soft. So I'm going to add it bit by bit, which means I'm going to cut off a little piece and drop it in. And I'm just going to let it work a little bit until it starts incorporating, and then I'm going to add the next piece up. Once again, my mixer is a medium low, and I'm slowly incorporating the butter. One of the most important things that we need to remember when we're working with hard doughs or babka doughs or bread doughs is that we need to remember to develop the gluten, and that takes time. You need to give your mixer between 10 to 12 minutes-ish, depending on your mixer, to work so that it develops the gluten. Now, as you can see, I'm dropping in the butter bit by bit, just letting it work and incorporate the butter into the dough. Small pieces. Now at this point, your dough might seem like very fatty and sticky and like it's not really a dough. It's more of like a glue. Don't worry. Keep on kneading. What the flour needs to do, it needs to saturate into it all of the liquids and the fats in order to create the dough that we're looking for. So we're going to continue adding our butter into the dough bit by bit. If anyone's doing the dough with me at the moment, I would really love to hear how you're doing and if it's working for you or not. Just a couple more pieces, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about baking. And one last piece. At this stage, I'm going to stop my mixer for a second and I'm going to show you where things are. So, as you can see, my dough at the minute has a lot of butter running around through it, but it's super, super, super sticky. You can see it on my fingers. You see it's super sticky. The reason being why is because the gluten isn't developed at all at this moment. So we need to make it, we need to let it mix a little bit more and develop. And at this stage, you just let the mixer do all the work for you, basically. Now, after your dough is finished mixing, we're going to roll it into a bowl, wrap it in cling film, and then leave it in either the fridge for leave it in the fridge for either 2 hours, minimum 2 hours, or overnight. That's absolutely fine. Like I said before, this dough will yield 2 very large babkas. Other pastries that you can make with it, like we said, we can shape it into different shapes and make it in different. Our dough is now mixing. Other equipment that we're going to be needing today is a loaf tin, which is the shape that I chose, but you don't have to use that if you want to make like a round babka. It's absolutely fine. Sugar syrup. Now the sugar syrup does 2 things. It prolongs the life of your babka, gives it a longer shelf life, but it also saturates it with sweetness because your dough, for 500 grams, you only have 100 grams of sugar. So it gives it a lot of sweetness to it as well, but it also saturates it with sweetness and with moisture. And it gives it a little bit longer of a shelf life. Brushing your babka after it finishes baking, don't be tempted to take the syrup and just pour it all over the babka. What it will create is a very soggy, like Paul Hollywood likes to say, soggy bottom. It makes the bottom of the babka will be very soft and mushy, and it will be a little bit disgusting. So don't do that. Use a pastry brush. And if you don't have a pastry brush, you can use a spoon. That's absolutely fine. But what we want to do is very, very carefully brush a little bit of syrup at a time, and just make sure that once your babka stops drinking the liquid, you stop. Before we bake our babka, we need to brush it with an egg wash. Egg wash is 1 egg mixed with 1 tablespoon of either milk or water. It gives it a nice shine. However, you don't have to if you're vegan or if you're, I don't know, if you don't eat eggs, it's absolutely fine. This babka that I baked earlier, just to show you, I did not brush it with egg at all. This is like its natural color that came from its own kind of like caramelization from the oven. You can scatter some sesame seeds on top of your babka if you like to, or some muscovado sugar, or something along those lines. Obviously, if it's a sweet babka, if it's a savory babka, feel free to, again, scatter some sesame seeds, Nutella seeds, or something along those lines. I'm going to stop my mixer for now because it's making a lot of noise. And I'm going to show you my dough that has been proving overnight. I kept it in a cling film. And for those of you who said earlier that their dough is very hard, it makes sense because it's been in the freezer all night, or for however long. Sorry, in the fridge, for however long it's been in the fridge. But it's okay. Just leave it outside at room temperature. And now we're moving on to the second phase. So I'm going to be using my pan tin to help me measure the size of the babka, which is, I'm going to explain to you in just a second how to do that. I have a little bit of flour here with me to flour my worktop. And the reason for that is obviously to prevent it from sticking. Please do not over flour your worktop. I'm going to show you now that the babka dough is quite sticky and tacky. You can see I have a little bit on my fingers. It's okay. It doesn't, like we said, a hydrated dough is a soft dough. So I'm going to be scattering a little tiny bit of flour on my worktop, and I'm going to place my dough on the flour. I'm going to take my rolling pin. Now, if you don't have a rolling pin, just use a bottle of wine, an empty bottle of wine, or a bottle of something that's round. It's absolutely fine. Done that as well. Everything's okay. And flour your rolling pin lightly. Again, as you can see, it's very, very light flouring. I don't want it to be over floured, because if you over flour your rolling pin or your worktop, it's going to incorporate itself into your dough, and then you're going to get a very hard babka. Mine has been in the fridge overnight. I took it out a few hours ago. It's very soft and fluffy, much bigger than yours. Okay. If you took it out of the fridge, so if you let it if you leave it outside of the fridge, it's going to continue proving, which means your dough has probably been overproofed by now. So for future reference, next time, leave it in the fridge just until you're ready to make it. Unlike what many people think, the second proving of the dough is much more important than the first proving of the dough. So if you've overproofed your dough before you rolled it, it's less important. Don't enable it to overproof in the second proof, meaning after you've filled it. The second proving is what's going to provide your dough with the right texture and the right rise. But the first rise is also very important. But you can do the first rise in the fridge. That's not a problem. Yes, so that's about that. With regards to freezing the dough, just before I'm going to roll it, with regards to freezing the dough, you can freeze the dough in various stages and take it out when you're ready to bake it or make it. The first stage that you can freeze it in is right after you've made the dough. This is the least preferable way to freeze a dough, but it's working. So make your dough, roll it in cling film. Immediately after you make it, shove it in the freezer. It will last there for a good 3 to 4 months. When you're ready to bake, take it out, defrost it, let it proof, fill it, roll it, and so on and so forth. The second method, which is, I think, the best one, is once it's had its first proofing, you fill it, roll it, braid it, or do whatever it is that you need to do with it, and then you freeze it. When you're ready to bake, remove it from the freezer, allow it to defrost and proof in room temperature, and then bake it. That's my preferred method. And obviously, the final product, the baked babka, can be frozen, can be kept in the freezer for a very, very long time. Now, to roll out your dough. So I'm placing it in front of me, and I want the length of my dough. So I'm going to create a rectangle, basically. And I want the length of my rectangle to be the size of a pan and a half. That way, it will not overflow, and it will have a nice shape maintained to it. So I'm going to start out, and I hope you can all see my worktop. I'm going to start out with my dough on my worktop, and I'm going to be rolling that out forwards and backwards. If you see small bubbles in the dough, absolutely fine. That's the yeast doing their job. I'm going to be turning the dough, and I'm going to repeat this again. Now I'm going to lift this so that everyone sees. Okay, I have a rectangle. Try and keep the rectangular shape. You get a nicer shaped babka that way. It's not that crucial. If it's not, it's a bit of a wonky rectangle. It's okay. I'm not gonna tell anyone. I'm going to measure my size, and I don't know if you can see, but at the moment, the size of my rectangle, the width of my rectangle is exactly the size of a loaf tin, my loaf tin, sorry. So I'm going to make it a tiny bit longer, and after that, I'm going to be stretching that the other way around. It depends on if you like your babka to be more doughy or more filled with filling. In my family, obviously, they love the filling, so I'm going to roll that a bit thinner. But if you like it more doughy, that's absolutely not a problem. Keep it at about 2 centimeters thick. If you want to make it with more filling, by all means, roll it a bit thinner. So, like I said, I'm going to be rolling that width-wise a tiny bit wider. I'm going to be measuring that again. 1.5, that's fine. And now I'm going to be rolling that lengthwise, or whatever size I was unrolling before. So at the moment, my dough is this thick. I don't know if you can see it, but it's about a third of the thickness of my fingers. This is enough if you like a very doughy babka. If you like a more filled babka, by all means, continue. So I'm going to be rolling that a little bit further. Now, as you can see, I'm not adding any flour to my worktop because I don't need it to. Even if it's a bit tacky on my worktop, it's still fine. And I'm trying to keep my rectangular shape, sorry, as much as I can do. Just a tiny bit more. Now, with regards to the filling, the filling that I offered online was basically a chocolate ganache. So it's equal quantities of chocolate and cream. Okay? The way that you're supposed to do that, you can warm up your cream in the microwave or in a small pot on the hob, it's absolutely fine, until it reaches almost a simmer, so it's warmed through. When it does, pour it over your chocolate and let it sit for a minute. After that, mix it with a spoon, then shove it in the fridge. Let it rest for a while until it comes down to a temperature when it becomes like a smooth smearing consistency. Another filling that you can do is Nutella or any kind of other, in Israel we have chocolate shachal, which is a chocolate spread that you can use. But if not that, like I said, you can use your ganache. And this is what the ganache looks like after it's been ready and it's soft. So I'm going to be spreading that on my dough. Now, this is really the point where you can be very, very, very indulgent, meaning you can add to that some chocolate chips or some nuts if you like. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to make my my chocolate babka, and then I'm going to spread that. Personally, that's for me, but you absolutely don't have to. I'm going to spread that with a little bit of, I'm going to sprinkle that, sorry, with a little bit of pistachios, just to add a little bit of a color and texture. So I'm spreading that all around my rectangle, and I'm leaving a little gap at the top. And that my gap at the top is going to be what's going to be sticking my dough to itself and making it, stay together. So,
Shiri?
yes.
Shiri, can you hear me? There's just 2 questions I can ask you for our audience. One is, isn't 700 grams of chocolate a lot? And the other is, can you please repeat what you do with the cream?
With regards to the isn't 700 grams of chocolate is a lot, I can't really answer that, can I? It's not a lot. For two babkas, 700 grams of chocolate is enough, I think. And if you have leftover ganache, you can always use it for something else. The recipe calls for 500 grams, not 700 grams, if it makes any difference. So 500 grams of ganache and 500 grams of cream. With regards to repeating what I did, so again, I took my cream before we went online. I took my cream and I warmed it up in the microwave until it was just warm. So I don't want it to boil and I don't want it to overboil, obviously. Just want it to be warm, or rich as simmer. As soon as it does, so if you do it in a pot on the hob, as soon as you see the little bubbles on the circumference of your pot, switch off the heat. When you do that, when your cream is warmed through, pour it on top of the chocolate and then let it sit for a minute or so. After that, take a spoon and just mix until it's all combined together. At this point, the ganache is ready, but it's quite warm. If you put it on top of your babka dough, what it's going to do is going to melt the butter in your dough and it's going to rip out your dough. So don't do that. Let it cool down in the fridge for a bit until it's a smearing or a spreading consistency, and then you can use that. If you're going to incorporate some stuff into your dough, which you can do, if you want to do it savory, you can add some dried herbs, for instance, or some dried tomatoes, or some chopped artichokes or something like that. If you want to do it sweet, obviously, you can add raisins or bits of chocolate and so on. Add that at the very last stage of kneading, not before that. Because if you do it in the beginning, when we put the flour and the yeast and everything, it's going to tear out the dough and stop it from forming the gluten. So we add it only after we're just about to finish kneading. That's when we add our additions, if you want to add them to the actual dough itself. Didn't realize it was for 2 babkas. Yes, 2 babkas. So I have my rectangle of dough that is smeared with the chocolate, and I'm going to show you a little trick how to roll the dough. The first line or so of rolling the dough involves pinching the dough. Why? Because we want to seal the filling inside the dough. And how are you going to do that? So I'm going to lift the dough. I'm going to start off from this side so you can see. I'm going to lift the dough. I'm going to roll it over itself, and I'm going to do a little pinch. I'm going to continue doing that, rolling and pinching, rolling and pinching, rolling and pinching, until I reach all the way to the end. And then again, second row, I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm rolling and I'm pinching, rolling and pinching, rolling and pinching. Once I reach this stage, I can freely and safely roll it as such. As you can see, my dough is being rolled together, and now I have this fat babka sausage. And now I'm going to take my loaf tin again, and I'm going to measure if it's big enough. If I'm, for some reason, it's a bit smaller, now is the time to stretch it out. If it's a bit too big, it's not a problem. Just scrunch it up towards itself. Try and make it, like I said, a pan and a half. If you see that some bit is fatter than the others, just play around with it. It's okay. It's a very, very forgiving dough. Now, at this stage, I can cut it, braid it, and put it in the loaf tin. However, because the dough is very soft and the filling is soft as well, it will probably be a bit wonky and not very pretty. Can you use a paper case lining? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Use paper case or not use a paper case, completely up to you. The way to prevent it being ugly, and I'm going to show you how it looks, because just for the sake of showing, I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut through down the middle of my roll. So firstly, it sticks to the knife a lot. And secondly, as you can see, it rips. So my recommendation to you would be just stick it in the freezer for 10 to 15 minutes. That way the dough stabilizes and it will much be easier to cut it. So this is my dough that I previously made, okay? It's been sitting in the freezer for about 15-20 minutes. It's not frozen, as you can see. It's pliable, but it's hard. I can hold it in my hands and it's not falling apart. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to run my knife down the middle. That's going to give us the krantz shape, okay? So I'm gonna roll my knife down the middle. Because my dough is firm, it's much, much easier to cut through it, okay? And then I have my 2 halves of the dough. And now I'm gonna braid it. If you can see inside my dough, you can see the beautiful bubbles of proving that my yeast have created. And now how to braid it. So you can start off at the top, it's okay, but I think it's creating a shape that's a bit wonky. So the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to start from the middle. So you cross them in the middle, you create an X, and then you lift this on top of that, just basically braid it into a corkscrew shape. The other side as well, under, over, and here we have our babka, okay? And then I'm gonna place it in my prepared tin and let it proof. Now, how much do I let it proof for? So the first proofing and the second proofing, the amount of time that I'm gonna proof it for is until my dough is springy to the touch. Now this is a babka I've been proving earlier. This is with the Biscoff cream and some, walnuts. So I want you to have a look here. I'm gonna press this and it springs back, okay? It creates a little dent which springs back. This means that my babka is ready to be baked. In order to bake this, I'm going to take my egg wash. Now, something I missed before, I wanted to put pistachios on that, but I forgot. So please do scatter that with chopped chocolates or pistachios or any kind of nuts and fillings that you like. It's going to make your babka much nicer. I'm getting my egg wash, which is, like I said, an egg and 1 tablespoon of water, or did you just twist half of it? Yes, this is half of my recipe. The other half, is the other babka. So I'm going to do an egg wash on this. Like we said, it's going to create a lot of color and it adds a little bit of a texture that I personally like very much. Oh, there's a big mosquito here. I'm going to brush it gently with my egg wash, and then to a preheated oven on 180 degrees until it is ready. Now, what is until it is ready? The way to know that a babka is ready, unlike usual normal cakes that you make, when you prick it with a fork or with a knife and it comes out clean, this is not the same because the dough is very different to those types of doughs. So in order to know if your babka is ready, you just take a small knife and insert it on the side and then push the babka gently and look underneath. If you see it's caramelized and brown and lovely, that means that your babka is done. Once your babka is out of the oven, you brush it with the syrup. Now, like we said before, the syrup adds moisture, it adds texture, and it adds flavor. And again, do not drench it with the syrup. Just lightly brush it. Now, the syrup is another opportunity for you to go a little bit crazy with the flavors. You can spice your syrup up with spices of all kinds, star anise or cinnamon or cloves, or even put some lemon zest or orange zest and flavor it up that way. And if it needs to speak the same language as your filling. So for instance, if you're doing a filling of ricotta cheese with some currants or something like that, some orange juice and some orange zest will go lovely with that. If you're making a cinnamon babka, which is the same dough that we just made with, just spread it with butter, sprinkle some sugar, brown sugar or white sugar with some cinnamon, and then you can make your syrup to taste spice up your syrup with some cloves or with some nutmeg even, make it kind of like a wintry, autumnly babka, and that's it. So this babka will now go in the oven. When it comes out, it looks something like this. And I'm going to, one more important thing. When it comes out of the oven, do not leave it in the tin, because that means that the bottom bit will get soggy because it's got its own humidity that comes from it's generating its heat from its own heat, and it's going to create humidity. So we're going to take a serrated knife and cut through our babka. and you can see all of the lovely layers within the babka and the crumbly texture that you get from the proofing. Okay. And that's how you bake a babka. Does anyone have any questions?
I think there was another question, Shiri, about can you use a paper case lining? I'm not sure if you answered that.
I have, but in any case, yes,
Okay.
yes,
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to talk a tiny bit about the different tins. So I'm using a metal tin. You can use a paper case tin, like not just the lining, just the actual tin can be made of paper. That's absolutely fine. Or you can use silicone tins. For this babka, I've used a silicone tin. As you can see, it's got a bit of a misshape because the problem is with silicone, it doesn't hold its own shape. I prefer baking that in a metal tin rather than a silicone tin. However, that's not to say that that using a silicone tin is not, it's not good, it's not helpful, or a paper tin. That's absolutely fine. You can use both. What do you do with the chocolate chunks? So with the chocolate chunks, after I let my ganache cool down and come to a creamy, spreadable consistency, I spread the ganache on top of that, and then I scatter it with some chocolate chunks. This is how they do that in Bread's bakery, or all the kind of like commercial babkas that you buy are usually made with that type of filling. So a chocolate filling, and on top of that you scatter a little bit of chocolate chips. When they melt in the oven, they create a bit more texture and a little bit more oomph to your babka, so to speak. Next question. Oh, thank you very much. Can you repeat what you add to the egg you spread on top? So egg wash is 1 egg whisked with a tablespoon of either water or milk. If you want your babka to be extra tanned in the fridge, put milk, because the sugars in the milk will caramelize and color your babka a lot darker. If you want it just to have a nice gloss on top, just do egg with a tablespoon of water in it. And the reason why we're adding a tablespoon of either water or milk is to dilute the egg a little bit, because if not, it creates a bit of a harder crust that I personally don't like, and I think it's much more delicate and nice when you mix that in with water or milk. Once again, once it's been egg washed, feel free to sprinkle that with sesame seeds or some muscovado sugar and so on and so forth. Leave that before you put the egg wash. Remember that you need to do the proofing and then do the egg wash. Don't do the egg wash and then do the proofing. Do the egg wash after you've done proofing, not like I just did, because I just wanted to show you how to do the egg wash. And once again, where's my proven dough? Oh yes, this one. So once again, we're waiting for the bounce, a little bit of a bounce, a spring to the dough. And once it's nice and springy, put it in the oven. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the weather. In England, it usually takes a bit longer. Just be patient with that. And depends on how active your yeast are, how humid it is in your house, how much moisture you have in your flour, how much moisture there is in the air, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Is there anywhere one can buy your babka? Well, I don't know if it's okay to self-promote, but I have my own business, my baking business, and I do bake babkas and other cakes. I'm based in North London, so do feel free to check out my website if you want to.
I just, by the way, I sent your website. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. And is the dough, can the dough stay in your fridge longer than 24 hours? I would draw the line basically at 24 hours. I wouldn't do it more than that, because after that, the dough can overproof. Now, let's say you have guests over for Shabbat dinner on Friday, and you're so super busy that you absolutely have no time to cook. And you say, oh, but Tuesday, Wednesday, I have a bit of time. So I suggest, going back to the freezing instructions, I'd suggest on Tuesday or Wednesday, make your dough, let it proof for the first proofing. You can do it overnight or 2 hours outside of the fridge. It's absolutely fine. Fill it, roll it, and immediately after you roll it and fill it and cut it and shape it and whatever, stick it in the freezer. Come Friday morning, remove your babkas from the freezer. That goes for challah as well, by the way. Remove it from the freezer. Just leave it outside. Let it defrost and come to room temperature and then proof. So it will take it about an hour or two to come to room temperature and another hour or so to proof. Again, remember, prick the dough with your finger just to make sure that it's nice and bouncy and fluffy. Once it's ready, just stick it in the oven and you're done. And you have fresh challah or fresh babka all ready for Shabbat dinner and everything's fine.
Did you answer the question about making the sugar syrup? I'm not sure. Did you answer that one? Any tips for making the sugar syrup?
The tips for making the sugar syrup. So 2 tips, which are actually the same tip. Don't underboil it and don't overboil it. Meaning, once you need to mix your sugar with the water and let the sugar melt completely. A lot of people, when it reaches this stage, they just remove the pot immediately from the hob. That's not a good idea because your sugar syrup is not a syrup. Oh, sorry. Your sugar syrup is not a syrup. It's just sugar water. It doesn't have the sugary consistency, like thick, almost maple syrupy consistency of a sugar syrup. However, if you are tempted to leave your pot on the hob for much longer, that means that your sugar syrup will thicken very, very much. It'll become almost like a very, very dense honey or manuka honey, and it will be impossible to spread it, and you are very likely to even burn it. So I'd say make the water reach a boil, like a rolling boil that you see like little bubbles coming up in the pot, and put a timer on for 3.5 minutes. After 3.5 minutes, it should be okay. Now this is my sugar syrup that I made earlier, and as you can see, it's got some consistency to it, but it's not very, very liquidy. And again, like we said, the very best tip that I can give you to make your babka, better than everyone else's, spice up your sugar syrup. Don't be afraid to put a pot of cardamom. Just take a pot of cardamom, whack it, just to release the flavors, chunk it in it. Put a couple of cloves, put a cinnamon stick, and zest some nutmeg into that, orange zest, lemon zest, a squeeze of orange, a squeeze of lemon. Just go wild. And this will take your babka, even your chocolate babka, if you brush it with an orange syrup, it will take it from being like a really good babka to an amazing babka. So frozen dough should be defrosted in the fridge. Nope. Defrost it outside of the fridge on your worktop until it's completely defrosted and proven. There's no point in defrosting it in the fridge. It will just take you a lot longer, and it will not defrost in time, and the yeast will not be activated enough, and then you'll just end up chucking the whole thing in the bin, which is a shame. So if you do freeze your unbaked dough, just put it on your countertop. Even in Israel, where it's really hot, it's not a problem. Let it defrost and come to room temperature, prove. If you're in a really, really hot climate, like in Israel in August, let it defrost outside of the fridge and then leave it in the fridge for the proving. But the defrosting has to happen outside of the fridge. How long do you estimate to bake it for? Well, depends on your oven, depends on the size of your babka, and I would say anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes even a bit longer. But like I said, it depends on your oven. My oven is a bit horrible, so I have to rotate all the time when I bake to make an even bake. And in my oven, this babka took about 40 minutes. So at 180 degrees. Don't be tempted to do it higher than that, because you'll just end up burning the outside and the inside will still stay raw and doughy. And that's why it's important to check the babka. Like I said, insert a knife on the side, just go like this and see that your babka is nice and brown on the bottom and it's got nice and brown edges. It's fully baked, and it will continue baking of its own heat even outside of the oven. So remember that. But don't remove it out of the oven too early, because then your babka will be basically like eating raw dough, and it's not very nice. For the filling, can I replace cream with full-fat milk? Yes and no. Full-fat milk will create a ganache to an extent. It won't be as nice, and the texture of the ganache won't be as creamy and spreadable. If you're doing that because you don't have any cream, just pop around the shop, Tesco. But if you're doing that for, you know, trying to do it in a less, you know, trying to save up on some fat, you can just basically use just chocolate chips. If you're not concerned about, you know, making a ganache or worried about making a ganache, it's absolutely fine. Just scatter it with some chocolate chips, a little bit of butter, just to make it all combine, and that's absolutely fine. Another idea for filling, by the way, if you take, I have here some tahini and some date honey. Mix it together, and you get a delicious vegan spread that is very Middle Eastern and absolutely delicious. If you do this in your babka, scatter some pistachios, and then in your syrup put some cloves or put some cardamom, you're gonna get a really amazing flavorful babka. How long do you have second rising? Second rising, like I said before, about 30 minutes, but it can be anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how hot your house is, how humid your house is, how hot your dough is, because heat helps the dough proof, and coldness stops or hinders the proofing of the dough. So it depends on all of these things, how long it's going to take. I'd say anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, but the best way to do it is just test to see that your dough is springy. Are rugelach some kind of mini babka? It's a good question. Yes and no. You can use your babka dough to make rugelach. It's very easy. I don't have extra dough to show you how to do that, but the way to do that is roll out a circle instead of a rectangle. Spread your filling in the middle of the circle and leave a very large margin, and then collect the sides of the dough in it like a parcel. Flip your dough over, roll it, and then cut it like a pizza. And then roll your little rugelach, and that's how you get rugelach. However, rugelach dough is a dough that doesn't have any butter in it, because butter adds richness. The fat in the rugelach dough comes from oil, which provides a much softer pastry that you will get from rugelach. So to answer that question, are rugelach a mini kind of babka? Like I said, yes and no. You can make it with a babka dough, that's absolutely fine, but it is an enriched dough that you put a chocolate filling in. Also, the filling for rugelach is usually not Nutella or chocolate ganache. Is usually a mixture of cocoa powder, sugar, and oil, which is parev, and it tastes slightly different and much more cocoa-y, I'd say, than compared to, you know, milk chocolate or dark chocolate ganache fillings. And I think that's it. Any other questions? 160 degrees, how long for? 180 degrees, not 160. If you do it on 160, your dough will dry out over time, because it won't get the nice caramelization that you would expect from baking. And how long for? Again, depends on your oven. I'd say anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes, depending on your oven and how well it's doing. Hang on a second, my dog is crying. Yeah, so I'd say anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes would be a good time frame for baking your babka. 180 degrees. Don't go over, because like we said before, it's going to make your babka burn on the outside but stay raw on the inside.
Okay, I think it's about that time. You've spent a lot of time with us tonight, Shiri. You really, as you saw in all the comments, you were absolutely amazing. I think everybody really enjoyed. We all learned. Of course, it sounds much easier to come to you and have you prepare it for us, but I think we're all going to give it a go. So you really were fabulous, and I think we've all confirmed that we all do need babka in our lives. I think that's 100% true. Just so everybody knows, we will fine-tune the ingredients. I know there were some discrepancies. You'll be getting a follow-up email with Shiri's contact details, her websites, the ingredients, the instructions. And if you have questions, you can feel free to get in touch with us, or maybe Shiri if possible. But it was really a lot of fun. I think this was a really nice kind of in between the Jewish holidays to have a really nice other sweet treat that we can all attempt to make ourselves for a sweet and a happy new year and a healthy new year. And well, good luck to all of you trying to make this on your own. Shiri, thank you again. We really enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun working with you, and I'm so glad we met you last year, and I hope that we'll do this again.
Please.
And thank you, and everybody, thank you for joining us, and tune into our other webinars. We do these frequently, so thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. It was fantastic. Thank you, Kara, and thank you, Anat. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.